to give you front and center this big URL here. That's where you can find a lot of the information that I'm going to be talking about. There are a series of PDF files that you can download and or print that talk about capital campaigns and what the foundation provides in terms of capital campaign support and what is involved in doing a capital campaign. So if you miss something, you can go back to it there. So where do capital campaigns fit into everything that we've heard today? Well, down here at the bottom, we have this ice cream cone which represents church assets. This is what we have: buildings, endowments, a parsonage perhaps, other assets. On top of that, we have annual giving, and Tom has just talked about annual giving. And the vanilla, the strawberry is mission-related giving that Barb talked about earlier. So apportionments, conference projects, special Sundays, all those kinds of things. The chocolate is planned giving, and Crystal talked about planned giving yesterday and handling of endowments. Today, special project giving, I'm going to talk about capital campaigns to support new ministry, ministry growth, new buildings, building renovations, and so forth. What is a capital campaign? Capital campaign is a high-intensity special fundraising effort. It has a specific goal of raising a substantial amount of money to fulfill a one-time need for the church. So most of the campaigns that I guess I would say all of the campaigns that I've done for churches in Wisconsin have been in six figures, with a six-figure goal. Or more, actually. We've had a couple that have been over $1 million. Anyway, what do churches use capital campaigns for? They need to build a new building or a parsonage or purchase one to eliminate debt that they may have incurred on previous projects. So I would say about half the time we're working with churches to eliminate debt, borrowing that they have done previously. It can be done for remodeling, adding an elevator. So this is very popular nowadays, making your church handicap accessible, adding restrooms, renovating sanctuary, or adding a fellowship hall or classrooms. And also for creating a fund for building maintenance or other endowments. So I think there's somebody in this room that I've done all of these things with. And it could also be for starting up new staffing or new ministry. So here are just a couple of examples. Did a bell tower entry and offices at Mount Horeb, UMC. All right, here's one just finished with Platteville. Pastor Raphael is here. The biggest part of it was like a $500,000 roof. Sounds like a lot for a roof, but in fact, they had to change all the windows. In order to do that, they really had to raise everything up and insulate and put in new insulation and things. So it turned out to be a pretty big project, but they had some money on hand. I think the whole thing was in the 700,000s, and like a third of it was on hand, and a third, some other money came in prior to the project starting, and then we did a capital campaign to cover the rest. So this is just the top half of kind of a spreadsheet that they put together to kind of keep track as they're meeting and doing these projects. So some of these projects have been done and paid in full. They still owed a little bit to the contractor for the roof. Down here are things, we're planning to do this. So we've paid the down payment on putting things in. If I was able to show you the other half, it would have some projects that aren't even finished yet, haven't even begun yet, but that they're working away. So I want to say something about the District Board of Location and Building. If you're building a new church, a new education building, or a new parsonage, or you're purchasing one of those, or you're doing a remodel to an existing church where the remodel is going to be cost more than 25% of the value of the existing building, you need to get approval of the District Board of Church Location and Building. It's in the Book of Discipline. What these boards, these district committees, often look at is what I call a rule of thirds, all right? 1/3 of the money on hand, 1/3 of the money pledged, and then you can borrow the rest to do a project. So suppose it's a $750,000 project, then you should have $250 on hand. You could get $250 pledged and borrow the rest. Of course, if you get pledges for all of it, that's great. But typically, most churches don't have $250,000 sitting around waiting for something to do, right? So usually they'll allow you to get pledges for 2/3, all right? In most capital campaigns, you may be taking money in for pledges from people over a 3-year period. 1/4 to 1/3 of the money will be there in the first year, because a lot of people are taking money from their assets rather than pledging over a monthly period. And because of that, it's easy for them to just take it and give you it as a lump sum. So you usually have quite a bit up front. And then one other thing I wanted to point out is what the foundation, provides consulting to do capital campaigns. They actually charge a fee for that because there are some costs involved. I don't think the fees actually cover the real costs, but nonetheless, there are other organizations also charging to provide help with capital campaigns. This is a study of 1,000 capital campaigns done by this consulting firm, Volkert May and Associates in Minneapolis. And what they showed was that if you hired a professional company to give you assistance, you raised 2.3 times your annual giving on average. Whereas if you didn't, you only raised 1.7. So there is a distinct advantage to getting professional help. And if the more they're on site, the better that is, all right? And the more in-person requests you have, the better that is, the better result you get. So just point out that I'm going to talk in a minute about more nitty-gritty about what the foundation does to help you, and that shows up in the bottom line. All right. So what's the foundation's approach? It's first of all to support the church throughout the campaign, right? The earlier in the process of thinking about a building project or whatever you want to raise the money for, that you get in touch with Jason and start talking about things, the better, all right? Even though, the part where you actually pay the foundation to do something might be months down the road, he can give you a lot of advice and remind you about some of these requirements and things that I have been talking about. We try to be present as much as possible, so it's typical for the steering committee in the church to meet, let's say, every 2 weeks. Jason will be there every 2 weeks. Of course, now Zoom makes that a little bit easier, but in person is also something that we try to do as much as possible. We also abide by what Tom was pointing out before, that this is about the giver's need to give more than the church's need to have. Even though we're going to say the church needs to have accessible bathrooms and the church needs to have an elevator, it's still the opportunity to talk to people about their call to give, their call to help, their call to be disciples. So we try to emphasize that. We always emphasize, you never ask or discuss church's money without discussing the mission and ministry of the church, all right? You never go to people and say, we have a hole in our budget, right? We have a need to reach out to people, right? We have a need to create disciples. We have a need to help the world. That's why we exist. That's what we want you to support. And that's kind of the thinking behind narrative budgets, which we showed earlier too. And we have a faith-based approach. And partly that distinguishes us from some other companies out there that help churches to raise funds. but don't always have the same intimate knowledge of this conference and of Methodist and Wesleyan approaches and so forth. And speaking of Wesley, we try to follow his approach to dealing with or talking to givers in terms of their whole lives, right? And all of their money. Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. So in particular, where save, if you read Sermon 50, The Use of Money, which is where this comes from, and it's not that long, it's doable, it's online. He's really saying, earn all you can, first of all, honestly, and not cheating people and not harming their health and that kind of thing. But live as simply as you can with that. Of course, support your family, feed, house, clothe your family, educate your children, do the things you need to do, but don't spend excessively on entertainments, don't have a bigger house than you need and that kind of thing. Then you will have money that you will be able to give. One thing that happened in the big housing bubble is people had lots more money. And at the beginning, during the bubble, not after, during the bubble, they had lots more money, but it was all being sunk into homes. So actually churches were struggling more when things were booming because people were spending it on themselves. If they had done it a little differently, then churches and other nonprofit organizations could have benefited better. And tithing. So tithing is going to work in a couple of ways, but one is, it is the official position of the church that tithing is the standard for United Methodists. So we haven't achieved our goal when we've met our budget. We have achieved our goal when we've helped people to move toward tithing, right? And as long as we aren't tithing, there is capacity. So sometimes church will say, do you think we can raise whatever? And I'm going to show you in a minute an example of how I do a little analysis, that analytic part that Jason was talking about. Run the numbers to show that we are not broke. So here it is. So is there money available? And this is an example using the conference, but it translates very easily to individuals. So in 2018, and you always have to do this a little retrospectively because you don't get the numbers until later, but in 2018, the median income was $60,733. The number of United Methodist giving units reported in the journal for 2018, 32,506. So that gives us a total income of $2 billion. $2 billion. Do you think we can get something done with $2 billion? Of course, not all that is going to go to the church. A lot of that is going to raising up our children and our grandchildren and feeding and housing and clothing. But if we were to give 10% to the church, that would be $198 million. What we do give is not insubstantial, right? $50 million, right? These 32,506 households of Methodists in Wisconsin gave $50 million in 2018 to their churches, to their missions, to their apportionments, right? Everything. But that's 2.5% of their income, not 10%. So if somebody says, is there capacity? I say, yes, there's plenty. There's plenty of capacity, and this is usually the number that I get. There are a few churches where they might be in the low threes. Wow, that's pretty good, all right? And one that was maybe a bit higher than that, but most of them are in the kind of 1.5 to 3 something, 3.2 range.